So why don't we go ahead and get started here. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Amber Kendrick, Vice President, Retirement Plan Consultant at Procyon Partners and co-founder of the WOW Women Owning Their Wealth Collaborative. Thank you for joining our webinar in honor of International Women's Day, Choose to Challenge Money Talk Taboo. Also joining me today is WOW co-founder Carolyn Wetzel. Hi, Carolyn.
Hello, great to be with you and with everyone today. Thank you.
And our guest, Karen Dranczyk from Neuberger Berman.
Hi, everybody. Glad to be here.
We're really excited about today's webinar, and we acknowledge the lines are muted, but certainly welcome any questions you may have. So please feel free to type them in the Q&A box, and we will do our best to address them at the end of the session. So while we're waiting for a couple others to filter in here, we wanted to kick off today's webinar with a polling question. So Carolyn, if you don't mind teeing that up. Okay, so the question here is, what percentage of women would rather talk about their own death than money? So we'll give it a couple seconds for you to answer. All right, Carolyn, if you want to show the results, drum roll. Okay, interesting. So 61%. So all of the ladies that are dialed in here, congrats, you got the percentage correct. So 61% of women would rather talk about their own death than money. Yeah, pretty impressive, right? So Carolyn later on in the presentation is going to provide additional context as it relates to that statistic. So Carolyn, if you'll take it to the next slide, please. Okay, wonderful. So we recognize we have a mix of new and returning WOW Collaborative attendees. So thank you again for taking the time to join us, and welcome. For those of you not familiar with the WOW Collaborative, WOW brings together people, perspectives, and tools that women can use to take control of their finances today and realize their dreams in the future. Carolyn and I co-founded the WOW Collaborative back in May of 2009, or 2019. I was about to say 2009. Can you believe it, Carolyn? It's
so exciting to be 2 years in. Wow.
Right. That's great. And we started it with really a shared vision of offering a safe space for female executives and business owners to come together where we can offer experiences that make learning finances fun, because believe it or not, it can be, right? And you can see here on this slide some of these fun experiences that we've hosted in the past. This was obviously pre-COVID, right? But some of them, budgeting and brews, investing 101 bingo, and here's one with a wine and food pairing, a discussion around what financial topics keeps you up at night. So now that we've introduced WOW, I'd love to take it to the next slide and introduce our panelists. So I'll start with myself. My name is Amber Kendrick, Retirement Plan Consultant with Procyon Partners and co-founder of WOW. I advise our corporate clients on all aspects of their retirement program, and I am very passionate about promoting financial literacy for America's workforce. So thank you, super excited to be here. Turn it over to you, Carolyn.
Thanks, Amber. I'm Carolyn Wetzel, co-founder of WOW as well, and a vice president private wealth advisor with Procyon Partners. By training, I'm a certified financial planner, and what I love to say is I provide clients peace of mind when it comes to their finances through financial health and financial self-care. Just delighted to be with you today and be part of this conversation.
Wonderful. Thank you. Now, Karen, if you would please introduce yourself. We're so excited to have you here as our guest.
My pleasure. My name is Karen Dranczyk. I'm a Senior Vice President at Neuberger Berman. Neuberger Berman is a large privately held asset manager based out of New York, but I'm actually in the Chicago area. I have 30 years experience in the financial services business in a wide variety of capacities, but I will say that the last almost 15 years with Neuberger have been strictly related to educating financial advisors and their clients on several different topics, but mostly around educating women around finances and some estate planning issues. And I'm really happy to be here today. Thank you for inviting me, gals.
Of course, thank you. All right, so now I'm going to turn it over to you, Carolyn, if you will introduce today's topic.
Thanks for that, Amber. One thing we're delighted to tee up for all of you today is the opportunity we all have in this moment. This week, March 8th, reflects the annual celebration of International Women's Day. For more than 100 years, both men and women around the world have used International Women's Day as an opportunity to celebrate the accomplishments and contributions of women in our community, and also raise awareness around the continuing gender differences that exist. In the spirit of acknowledging both the power and potential of women and men working together going forward, we here at WOW Collaborative wanted to unite our theme today with the webinar around the International Women's Day celebration. In that spirit, we have titled our program today in the same theme of International Women's Day 2021, which is Choose to Challenge. Using that theme of Choose to Challenge, all people around the world who are celebrating International Women's Day are inspired to see and look around them. What is it that we would like to challenge or do differently? Because in challenging, we are prompted to change behaviors. So we here at WOW Collaborative looked around and consulted with other members of our WOW Collaborative network and determined as a team that for our webinar today, we will retain the Choose to Challenge theme and focus on Choose to Challenge Money Talk Taboo. Now, what do we mean by that? As you see here on the next page, there is a real cost in our families, in our communities, with people choosing to refrain from talking about money. There is a very real cost to money silence. As all of us talked about earlier in the webinar, more than 61% would rather talk about death and how light a topic is that than their own money. And what we want to do here at WOW Collaborative, and even today in this webinar, is to acknowledge that reality and provide both information and tools that you can work with wherever you are in this moment in your own relationship with money, so that this cost of money silence does not inhibit you from owning your wealth. And we hope that it inspires you to not only own your wealth, but to share the information and inspire those around you to own their wealth too, both women and men. And so when we think about what are the costs of money silence, what you see on this page are just some of the high-level points from a variety of sources, both from financial services studies to American Psychological Association. There are both personal impacts to retaining the money silence as well as professional. Let's take a step back. Nearly 8 out of 10 women will be responsible for their own finances over the course of their life. Either by choice, they're choosing to live independently for the duration of their life, or by circumstance. Perhaps they're in a committed relationship and then they change it to then one of divorce, which is happening more and more for people who are 50 and older, or by circumstance in terms of widowhood. They're surviving their loved ones. And when this happens, as a result, women need to have a level of clarity and understanding around what are the different pieces of their financial picture. If they don't have that clarity within and for themselves alone when they're independent, or conversely, in that relationship, if they've chosen to be part of one, then personally, as you can see on the left-hand side of the page, there are some severe trade-offs or real costs. If you're in the committed relationship with someone else, if you have different expectations around what your money is covering, if you have different obligations and priorities around what you're paying off first, this causes great tension. And this is something we all know. And it causes lots of fights, which, according to the American Psychological Association, finances are one of the leading causes of divorce. And just because you don't talk about it doesn't mean it goes away. In fact, it gets worse. Other trade-offs and other considerations personally for retaining that taboo and not talking about it include low financial literacy. This is just fancy words to saying you don't know what you have and you don't know how to use it. And this includes everything from your budget, your cash flows, your investments, your insurance choices, how you're paying down debt, and then how the pieces fit together. What we want you to do is, no matter how much you understand about them or know about them today, acknowledge that there is an opportunity to learn more and to practice more and to talk more, because it's only through that acknowledgement and practice that it will become more real, less taboo, and more personal. And lastly, the third personal impact has to do with family wealth transfer failures. Said differently, when in the family, there might be assets or other financial priorities that are trying to go from generation to generation. If people aren't talking about it, plans for moving those assets, plans for moving that money may not happen according to plan. We need to talk about it, manage expectations, set up the structures and expectations around it, and that makes it happen smoothly. And that's all just on the personal side of not talking about money. Professionally, there are statistics that demonstrate impacts as well. Firstly, lower compensation. When women are not being their own advocates, when they're, quote, just being diplomatic or being nice, they're not able to articulate their worth financially from a professional setting, and they miss out on having higher compensation. And this reality is also seen from business ventures for women entrepreneurs. When there are studies that cite that there is lower business funding available from banks and venture capitalists for women who are not being as strong advocates for themselves and their companies and their business ventures as well. So this is why, as a team, we're delighted to tee up the conversation today and make clear to you that in celebrating all that women and men acknowledge women have already done today, we are choosing to challenge with you that lingering legacy of money talk taboo. We with you want to stop the silence, start the conversation, even through our dialogue today on this webinar around how we can understand what to talk about and make it happen.
Wonderful. Carolyn, thank you so much for that. You did such a great job of identifying the why. Why is this topic so important? I'd love to turn it over to Karen now to talk to us around the what, right? What should we be thinking about as women? What should we be thinking and talking about when it comes to our finances?
Terrific. I want to start off by telling everybody a little story. This was actually a true story that got my firm involved in this subject matter and educating clients. And it involves my colleague, Sherry Brooks at Neuberger, was doing an investment education seminar for a group of female clients in Southern California about 10 years ago. And in the middle of her presentation, one of the clients actually stood up and she said, "Ladies, this information is really great." She said, "But I'm here to tell you there's more above and beyond what Sherry is talking about that you need to know." And she handed out 2 sheets of notebook paper that she'd created for every woman that was in the room. And she said, "Ladies, on these 2 sheets of paper is everything that I wish I would have known when my husband passed away and I was only 38 years old and had 4 children." She said she and her husband owned his own business. She was a stay-at-home mom. They had been to see their estate planning attorney. They'd had wills drawn up, they had trusts drawn up, they had a buy-sell agreement that was going to be executed. Upon, if anything happened to her husband, it would sell the business to his business partner, and some various assorted issues related to guardianship of the children. Well, they'd had the documents drafted. The drafts were sent to their home on a Friday afternoon. Her husband came home from work, saw the paperwork sitting on the kitchen table, and said, "Oh, good, we'll look this over the weekend, and then we'll go in on Monday and sign the papers." Well, he got up on Saturday morning and went for his usual run in the morning at 6:30, and he was struck and killed by a drunk driver at 6:30 in the morning, 1.5 miles away from his house. She said, the worst thing, she said, above and beyond being grief-stricken and having to take care of 4 grief-stricken children, was the fact that she knew absolutely nothing. She said, "I didn't know what we owned." She said, "I didn't know where it was. I didn't know who I had to work with in terms of getting everything settled." Ultimately, she ended up having to go to work for her husband's business because the buy-sell agreement was not executed. And she said, in the middle of all of this, I'm trying to keep my head above water and trying to take care of emotionally my 4 grieving children. So she put together a list of things that she wished that she had known, that she thought every other woman should know about. And a lot of the information that I'm going to go over here is the information that we got from Robin about 10 years ago. I hope you appreciated that story, not so much for its shock value, but for the very reason that it's a really big reason for us to get invested in knowing everything that we own as a family and as a couple. Involving your spouse in your conversations about money might be difficult, but it's well worthwhile. My husband and I have both been in this business for over 30 years. And it's still a little difficult for us to come to the table once a year and bring all of our information together. My husband was married once before. I was single for a very long time. We both have our own attitudes about money, but once a year we come and we bring all of our paperwork. And even though we're highly educated in the subject matter, every year without fail, when we sit down to go over it, we find some surprises. And mostly it's my husband, when I show up with my 2 pensions that he totally forgets that I have every year. And he's like, "Woohoo, we found money. We have extra money that I thought
Nice
about."
surprise, right, Karen?
Yeah, I know. It's like, "Ooh, I did something good." So it's worth having the conversation. In the event of something terrible happening, whether someone becomes sick, someone passes away, you need to understand what you need to do first and where you need to go. So having this emergency file, if you will, that literally is going to leave a roadmap for your surviving spouse and your children becomes incredibly important too. And it starts off with all of the legal documentation that everybody's going to need and the professionals that are going to need to be contacted. So at a bare minimum, your will, if you have one, and I highly encourage everyone that's on this call, whether you're married or single, divorced, having a will is a basic necessity, because it is going to make sure that everything that you own is distributed according to your wishes and not according to the state where you live. So understand where your will, any trust documents, all of the ownership paperwork for your real estate and your, what I like to call your motorized vehicles, previous year's tax returns. Literally how many of you could lay your hands on your birth certificate if you had to right now? I actually just found mine when we moved 2 years ago. Things like military discharge paperwork, the documents related to your life insurance information, all of your financial statements for investment accounts, checking accounts, savings account. And then above and beyond that, since we keep so much of this information digitally now, as opposed to on paper, where are the passwords for everything? My mother recently passed away in October of 2020. And before she passed away, she had been incapacitated. She had a brain tumor and she was not able to take care of her own financial affairs. And as her agent, I was able to step in and do that. And one of the best things that we had done in preparation for a time when that would be necessary was to go through all of her monthly household expenses and set them up so that I knew the username and the password for each individual account so that I could go in manually and pay all of her bills on a regular basis without ever missing a beat. So don't underestimate knowing where all the usernames and passwords are for not just your accounts, but all of your electronic devices as well. So your desktop computer, your laptop computer, et cetera.
Hey, Karen, if
Yeah.
I may, before you move on, and talking about wills, right? Oftentimes, Carolyn and I speak with women that think that that's something that they should perhaps wait, right? In terms of age, do you have any thoughts around that? Say, for example, your late 30s or early 40s, is there kind of a best practice when to be, starting to think about that?
Well, I'm going to answer your question in another direction first, and then I'll specifically answer that question, Amber.
Okay.
When you're in your 30s and your 40s, the most important document that you can have is not your will. It's going to be something called a durable power of attorney, which means that it's a document that says if anything happens to me, whether it's physical, maybe I'm in an accident and I just can't physically get up to manage my affairs, or mental incapacity, who knows? I mean, you could have an accident and, be mentally impaired, or just, things happen. Having a durable power of attorney is what's going to let someone take care of you with your own assets. And it's important because it's effective while you're living. The other important document is your healthcare power of attorney. While in your 30s and 40s, while you're living, in the event that anything happens to you, no one's going to be able to talk to the doctor about your medical care unless you give away that healthcare power of attorney. So not even your mother or a spouse, you actually have to create this document so someone else can make medical decisions for you. So I would say that those are the two biggest ones for the younger people to have, but I highly encourage anyone that's accumulated any kind of assets at all. If you own a home, even if you still owe a lot of money on your home, if you own a home, if you have some savings, and if you're married, definitely you should have a will. Some people are going to have things that are going to need to be done that are a little bit more sophisticated, like trusts that need to be set up, especially in second marriage type situations, maybe. But a will is basic enough and inexpensive enough that I think everybody should have one. And what it does is it tells your loved ones how you want to distribute all of your assets and when they will be distributed according to your wishes. And if you don't have one, the state where you live will basically create one for you, and it will distribute only according to the formula that the state that you live in has for distribution of your assets. And it's usually to, if you're married, a spouse, if you have children, then a portion will go directly to the kids. And you might not like the way that your state has that set up. So I tell everybody, for about $500, you can probably go get a really inexpensive will and have yourself covered. So that's a long way of answering your question, but I'm a big believer in powers of attorney and healthcare powers of attorney, especially for the younger set.
Thank you, Karen.
My pleasure. I will tell you, and if you want to go ahead and go to the next slide, because I'm going to cover everything that's on the bottom of this on the next slide too. Everyone needs to get their arms around their finances at some point in time in your life. And I always say there's no time like the present. And the statistic that Caroline quoted is one of the ones that I often use. 80% of us are going to be managing our own finances at some point in time of our lives, whether it's of our own choosing or not. And you don't want to be like Robin and not know anything. So get your arms around how all of your, what I like to call liquid money, is managed. Stocks, bonds, cash equivalents, whether you own annuities or not, if you own mutual funds, if you have a pension, The biggest thing that I highly encourage everybody, and I'm preaching to the choir here, is if you have the ability to do a 401k plan or an IRA or any type of qualified plan, especially if there's a matching component, pay yourself first. This should be the first thing that everybody looks at. But don't just know what you have in these, but really understand how the actual investments are made here. And if you need to get educated, there are a wide variety of sources that will get you up to speed. Number one, your financial advisor is a really great resource to get the education around all of these particular types of assets. I tell everyone, one of my favorite publications ever, and if you have children, it's a great way to introduce it as well, is the Wall Street Journal's Guide to Investing. It's a relatively short book, but it's a basic level setting. This is how investments work in your portfolio. And that's a great place to start. I will also tell you there's a website that I'm incredibly fond of called wife.org, and it stands for the Women's Institute for Financial Education. Their tagline is, "A man is not a financial plan." So I actually think that that's kind of cute, but it discusses a wide variety of financial topics, not just about assets, but also about credit related issues, which leads me to my next subject. Understanding what you owe in addition to what you own is also incredibly important. I remember reading an article many years ago about a couple who remained nameless in the publication, but it was a woman who had been married to a celebrity for a fairly long time. And upon her divorce, she found out that she was personally responsible to the tune of $10 million worth of debt, because her husband's business manager had put most of the debt in her name as opposed to her husband's name. And she had no idea, because when she got married, she signed a confidentiality clause that gave her husband's business manager to manage all of this information, and she never knew. And shame on her. You should always be aware of where you stand from a debt perspective. One of the best ways to do that is to constantly monitor your credit score. That will give you a good indication of how well you're doing in managing your debt. Most of us are going to die with some kind of debt. You'll probably owe money on a home, or have a little bit of money left out on credit cards or other types of personal loans. But what you need to understand here is, what is the level of debt? When is everything due? And most importantly, especially if you're married, is understanding how each debt is actually paid. Do you pay it by check every month? Do you go in and pay it manually online with a username and a password? Or is it automatically debited from a checking account? But understanding what you have and how it's paid is incredibly important here. Insurance is also really important. Understanding the level of your insured capacity in terms of life insurance is a big one. Knowing how many policies you have, not just on your life, but on your husband's. My husband actually just handed me another sheet of paper yesterday. Actually, I have it right here, that he was actually able to qualify for a little bit more life insurance. And I'm like, well, why are you handing this to me now? And he goes, well, I just really want you to know that if anything happens to me sooner rather than later, you know, it's a little bit more than what the company that he works for has him set up to get. But it goes in the pile with all of the other insurance information that we have. Health insurance, whether it's through your insured or your employer, or if you have gone out and gotten your own healthcare coverage. If you have life insurance, the one thing that I'll impress upon everyone is, if you're married and you have children, there is no great big clearinghouse somewhere that your heirs can go to find out how many life insurance policies that you have. The burden of proof is going to be on you to tell them how many you have and where they're located. Because the life insurance business is set up to where they don't have to go out and find out how many policyholders they have that died in a given year and then start paying the money out. The reverse is true. policyholders have to notify the life insurance company that you have a policy for a loved one that passed away. So don't let anything get lost or fall through the cracks with respect to life insurance. Disability insurance, I've had a disability policy since I was 20 years old. I was single for a very long time, and this is the one thing that frightened me more than anything, was that I would lose my ability to work and not have a really great way to replace the majority of my income. So I'm a big believer in disability insurance, especially if you're young and you're single. Again, let everyone know that you have these policies, you know, how much you're insured for, who is it through, how much are the premiums every month. And then the last thing that's on here, and I'll bring this up because it's cheaper when you're younger, and it's going to be incredibly important, is long-term care insurance. Because for a lot of reasons, it's actually more important for women than it is for men. The majority of us will actually take care of our spouse through some kind of a prolonged illness, and potentially eat up a lot of our retirement dollars paying for that spouse's medical care, which leaves the pot to be a little bit smaller to take care of our medical care when we're single. So in some ways, long-term care is, you know, if you're going to have to choose between husband or wife to do it, it's almost better to choose the wife. It's one of those things, again, where it's cheaper when you get it when you're younger, and do it as a matter of practice to carry it throughout your life. But the cost of healthcare is only going to continue to go up throughout our lives. And this is a nice way to hedge it. Now, the last thing is my really big soapbox, which is legal documentation. We already talked about wills and we talked about powers of attorney. These are all documents that you will get from an estate planning attorney. They come as part of what we call an estate plan. And other documents that may or may not be necessary for you to get your hands on at some point in time are a prenuptial or a postnuptial agreement before you get married, or if you've done one after a postnuptial agreement. For those of you that are divorced, do not ever throw away, fold, spindle, or mutilate your original divorce decree, because it will become necessary multiple times throughout your life when you go to apply for credit, believe it or not. They're going to want to make sure you don't owe your previous spouse any money. So don't ever get rid of your original divorce decree. And if you own your business, everybody needs to know where the articles of incorporation, if you're incorporated, or other business related documents are located in your home or at your office. So this is a lot of info. I think now that we're stuck at home still for, I think, a little bit more time, everybody's looking for a project to work on. And I say no time like the present to start gathering a lot of this information and putting it in a central file, if you will, so that if anything happens to anyone, literally all you have to do is pick up the file and run with it. I also say that while you're doing that emergency file, include some of your healthcare information in there as well. Things like medications, who's your primary care physician, if you have a specialist that you work with for an ongoing condition, their contact information as well. And then make sure, I always staple to the outside of the file, the name of your financial advisor, the name of your estate planning attorney, and the name of your tax professional if you have one, to go on the outside of the file as well.
Thank you, Karen. All of this is so helpful. I do have a question before we move on here. We're identifying the importance of, taking inventory of your finances, right? And you mentioned a file. Curious to where you would suggest housing these documents.
That's a really good question. The older generation were big believers in something like a safe deposit box. And that's where you took all your important papers, you put them in the bank, and you put it under lock and key. I've worked with attorneys on a regular basis, and I make it my mission to interview all of them on where they think these documents should be located And about 99% of them say that these documents should be kept at home, somewhere safe and somewhere accessible. So in my mind, that means if you have a safe at home, whether it's in your house or in the garage or in the basement, let everybody know that they're located in the safe, and then let whoever you have named as executor for your estate, or whoever you have named as your agent, in the event of a period of incapacity, let them know what the combination is to get the safe open. If you don't have a safe, don't feel like you're in left field, because most people don't have them. Somewhere that is lockable, like a filing cabinet that has a key, is a really good idea. Just make sure that it's fireproof and floodproof. And at a bare minimum, I always tell everyone this works because it's fireproof and floodproof. Put everything in a Ziploc baggie and stick it in your freezer.
Okay.
And one of the reasons that I say to do that is because paramedics in this country are actually being trained to where if they can't find advanced medical directives, in other words, do not resuscitate orders, they're being trained to look in people's freezers for that information. So it's a great idea because it's fireproof and it's floodproof, and almost every house has one. Just let everybody know where it is.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Karen. We started with the why, right? You've done a great job of articulating the what. So I'd love to transition now to Carolyn. So Carolyn, in your experience in working with female clients, let's talk about the how. So, we've set the stage here, right, of all the things that you need to be thinking about. So for our attendees, if you could share, how do you suggest getting started?
Thanks for that, Amber. And I would love to frame this next stage as this is a no judgment safe zone. No matter how much you have or have not talked about it before, that's okay. As we now consider all that Karen has reinforced for us that's important to account for, let's just begin first by recognizing it's important to start the process. So what we do first is, whether you are working independently or you're part of a family unit, acknowledge that you have both attitudes and behaviors and a money mindset that is a culmination of years of experience that are both very clearly and in ways we never see coming affecting how you view the world. And the first step of this acknowledgement enables you then to have a level of sensitivity to realize that with that awareness, then you can start to acknowledge when there is emotion related to it. So step one, recognize you have a money mindset as a consequence of years of experience. And if you're in a partnership, your partner has that too. And as a result of that recognition, seeing that each of you have different emotions that bubble up. For some people, it might be a level of anxiety. For other people, it might be a level of fervor and an aggression, who knows, but there could be emotions that we're not even aware of that bubble up. And step three is just start practicing. It doesn't mean you have to talk through every single item on Karen's list, day one, hour one, minute one, but it begins with saying in a safe space, and maybe it's with one other person you trust. Maybe it's with your parent or your sibling or your partner, and just start saying, do you talk about your budget? Do you talk about investments? What do you talk about? Here's what I'm starting to realize about this. And it's just in the same way children play and experiment with a new behavior. This is our opportunity to play and experiment with a new behavior and talking about the money. And then as we start practicing more, start to prioritize in that list the basics, those things perhaps that you know most about, to just start to get the conversation going. You may recall how Karen laid out the combination of what you own in the assets versus what you owe in the liabilities. We find that the majority of women have a command, for instance, of their household budget and a lesser degree of awareness around the individual holdings in their investments. So in the step 4, maybe you begin with, here's how I understand the budget works today. And if you're in a partnership, asking your partner, for that aspect that you're managing, help me understand more. And it's beginning with the basics and then just beginning to progress into the other areas that you don't have as much expertise in. And that's okay, because at the step 5 is you expand with practice and experience. Talking about money is the same as exercising, is the same as learning a new hobby. It starts with an awareness and improves and becomes more natural only with time. So this is an opportunity. The how is around knowing where you are in this moment, acknowledging that in light of that life experience, there could be a whole bunch of emotions, and those emotions will change as with any relationship. You start by practicing in a safe space in bits and pieces. Focus on what you know most first to build that initial confidence. Acknowledge that it's going to change as you expand. And lastly, just keep practicing. It reminds me of 2 quotes. I loved how Karen shared stories and narratives. There are 2 stories I'd love to share around this. One is when my mother-in-law was talking about beginning a new behavior, she says, it's kind of like eating an elephant, which is kind of funny to hear because my mother-in-law is pescatarian. I said, oh, how is that? And she says, 1 bite at a time. That's kind of how you begin the process. And the second story or the second narrative is you just keep showing up. You're not going to get it right, and you're not going to get it right all the time. And it's not about getting it right. It's about doing it, just keeping doing it. So I hope that those 5 tips are helpful in terms of acknowledging the reality, and the goal is just keep talking. We're going to stop that money silence.
Thank you so much for that, Carolyn. If you'll take it to the next slide. And in doing so, we did have a question that came up. So I'd love to direct this to you, Karen. And if you have any thoughts to Carolyn, the question is, what is your take on life insurance with the long-term care rider versus a long-term care policy?
Oh, you are not asking the right person.
I know we don't have a benefits advisor on this call, but
I am willing to admit what I don't particularly have an expertise in. I really couldn't tell you one way or the other, even though I spent literally 2 months traveling around with an annuity wholesaler talking about annuities with long-term care riders. It has been so long that I couldn't begin to tell you. That's a conversation you need to have with your own financial advisor to be able to do that.
Sure. Carolyn, any thoughts there?
Sure, I can hop in. As a financial advisor to clients, what I love to do is help them understand that when it comes to the long-term care insurance world, there are a variety of solutions and choices. And as highlighted in this question, when it comes to long-term care, there is a traditional style of long-term care that has to do with the exchange of recurring premiums. You have an exchange, a level of coverage if you experience a series of events that happens in your life. Over time, that traditional long-term care insurance coverage was found to fit a particular need, but there were other interests or needs that people were seeking over time. So as the question highlights, there now today include life insurance policies that exist. So there is a death benefit to the insurance policy with a life-term care rider on top of it. In this type of a forum, without having additional detail or insight around the other pieces of a person's full financial picture, as a fiduciary, I couldn't specifically comment on this, but what I can say in a general perspective is the decision around long-term care in particular, and then once long-term care has decided what specific solution makes sense, is very unique to each person, and there are absolute both benefits and trade-offs to each style. So I acknowledge that is a more education-focused answer rather than an advisory specific answer, and would happily take that offline for sure. Amber, you're on mute, just so that you know.
Thank you so much. You would think after a full year of this, right? You would acknowledge that you're on mute. Love it. And I also assure you, I am very enthusiastic about our brand and our background. However, you know, we just, you keep showing up and doing the best you can. I don't know what happened with our virtual background here, but as we wrap up, I just want to say thank you. Thank you again for taking the time out of your day, and there will be some follow-up. We would love for you to share some feedback. We always provide surveys after our events, and here illustrated are some of the upcoming events that ideally you will have time to attend. We also are recording this, so we'll be able to share any of the events afterwards that you aren't able to attend. So we look forward to seeing you ideally May 12th at noon, and we'll be discussing finding and funding your money why. So thank you again. Thank you, Karen, for all of your expertise and joining us here today on behalf of myself and Carolyn and Procyon. It really means a lot. So thank you. And
My pleasure.
I just feel so fortunate to be around such dynamic women and dynamic women that are on the line here today with Women's History Month and just celebrating International Women's Day. So again, thank you.
My pleasure.
Thank you. All right. Well, with that, we'll conclude.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.